This episode of Policing Matters is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support, and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com. Hey, welcome back. You are listening to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I'm Jim Dudley. Hey, welcome back. And if you're not watching us on YouTube, check us out and you can see what our guests look like and some of their backgrounds and graphics. All right, well, some incidents resulting in officer-involved shootings and other types of force are inevitable outcomes of policing. They are mostly unpredictable, sometimes spontaneous, but other times they are predictable. And as Gordon Graham coined, predictable is preventable. Axon, formerly known as Taser, has released the Axon Public Safety Gun Fatality Database. Published in collaboration with the Institute for Intergovernmental Research, the IIR, a private nonprofit research organization, the report is the result of thoroughly researched, collected, and analyzed information related to all shooting deaths from 2021 through June 2023 in all U.S. jurisdictions involving officers and civilians. Today, we will talk about how this effort came to be as part of Axon's Moonshot goal, the database, how it was researched, and what the initial findings tell us to keep law enforcement officers safe, improve training, and in helping them make good decisions. Well, welcome to Policing Matters. Mike Wagers, Senior Vice President, Strategic Initiatives at Axon. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure, Jim. Thanks for having us. Been in this field for over 20 years now. Public, private. I got my PhD from the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice in criminology. I've worked at the IECP. Been the Chief Operating Officer in the Seattle Police Department. I stood up the Justice and Public Safety Program at Amazon Web Services, and I've been at Axon now for coming up on 7 years.
Nice. Welcome. And Ty Nguyen, Senior Data Scientist, also part of Axon. How'd you get involved, Ty?
Hi, Jim. Thank you for having us. So I graduated from Stanford in 2019 and with a degree in management science and engineering. And have been with Axon ever since. I started off more internally in sales operation, but quickly, the data was awesome, and I love specializing in data. And with the launch of the Moonshot goal, just been trying to help out and doing a lot of the research and the analysis, especially earlier on for this project. So excited to share some of that.
Yeah, excited to talk about it. Great to have data and have somebody like you sort it out and tell us what it means. Well, it seems obvious that we should be doing this type of research, and we've seen studies by the Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in the form of the Line of Duty Death Report, some other reports that talk about incidents and precursor activities. How's this different, and how did it become part of the Moonshot goal? What is the Moonshot goal?
Yeah, sure. Well, the Moonshot goal is a pretty audacious goal that we've set with our partners to reduce gun deaths between police and the public by 50% within 10 years. And there's two parts to that. That means fatal officer-involved shootings. So when an officer has to take someone's life in the line of duty, and also is a part of that is also when officers are killed in the line of duty. And, the origins of it was coming out of COVID, coming out of after the death of George Floyd, thinking, what can we do as a company to really make a difference? And lots of progress made across the country over the past couple of decades. And then you had COVID and George Floyd and just sort of threw all that up in the air. And we were watching, just the strife and the conflict, and noticing that despite the best work a police department could do, engaging with their community, reducing fatal officer-involved shootings, reducing crime, even though, things obviously weren't trending in the right direction in 2020, 2021, and going into 2022, you would still notice, like, despite their best efforts, if there was a fatal officer-involved shooting, whether justified or not, and we know that almost all are justified, that would set that relationship between a police department and their community back several steps, right? You would have to have those conversations. Like, why did that officer have to take that life? So we thought, what if we could step in and set an audacious goal for the company, get some partners around this, to if we could reduce that number, that flashpoint when an officer has to take a life, or conversely, when an officer is killed in the line of duty, if we can reduce that substantially, can we then make real progress in the field and sort of propelling it forward to sort of have better outcomes all around?
Yeah, of course. Number one reason why you did it. Well, how did you come by the data? We've had some problems with the FBI UCR being collected by our 18,000 law enforcement agencies. The NIBRS transition was really spotty. Of course, 2020, the pandemic really had a lot to do with the data collection. Where'd you get it, and who helped in interpreting it?
Sure, yeah. You're right. Like sort of all current existing data collection efforts really didn't provide you with the timely information you needed to make some sense of this, and didn't provide enough detail in terms of, as you said earlier, like if you can predict it, you can prevent it. Well, we need to know a whole lot more if we're going to try. We knew that, as many do, others out there know it, chiefs, sheriffs, colonels, researchers, like we need a lot more data if we're able to say some things that we can get to where we can prevent some of these tragic deaths on both sides. We began by looking at sort of the open source data that's out there now, the Washington Post, and what can we learn from their current data collection efforts, and then as we were doing that, like, how can we take it several steps forward? So, I mean, that's actually looking at their data first is how we got to the number that we got to. So yeah, we wanted to have just like the original Moonshot goal that JFK set, like we're going to the moon in 10 years. Like that was like hard to think about back then. I mean, for us today, you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. We did it. We made it. Cool. Like now we're going to go to Mars. Right. But like thinking about this, like what can we, like, we don't want to make incremental progress. We don't want to just reduce gun deaths between police and the public by 5% or 10%. That's great. Every life saved certainly is meaningful, and that matters. But how can we do something that really galvanizes what we do as a company across the entire company, and what our partners can do as well? So we looked at the data, and so we obviously wanted to have that be a big number. So 50% was stuck in our mind that look, if we could do that, let's just say fatal officer involved shootings, if it's running somewhere around above 1,000 to 1,100, if we can cut that down to 500, that'd be a big start. But then we started digging into their data that they have, which again is just open source media reports. What we started to find was important sort of nuggets in there. And one being that in about 40% of the cases, when an officer had to take a life, when it's a fatal officer involved shooting, the suspect had an edged weapon. So it had a knife, a machete, some sort of sharp object. So like sort of light bulb goes off right away. Like those seem to be cases, if there's time and distance involved, then maybe we can make a difference. For example, in the things that we do. Like, and again, we're not saying we can do all of this, but as a technology company, we make tasers. Like, could we make a better taser? Could we give officers in the field a better device that if they had time and distance, could we take off a substantial chunk of that 40% number where the officers maybe can use a less lethal device when the suspect has an edge weapon? Now, that's not saying like any prior officer involved shooting where there's an edge weapon was unjustified or should not have happened. Like that is the fault of us and other technology companies. We haven't given officers the right technologies to feel comfortable in doing that. So that was sort of the start. Like there is an existing database out there. It is run by a media company, but there's some good stuff in there. And then that got us going to start doing our own analysis, digging further down using open source data, looking at body camera footage, encoding some of the other data that we have.
Mm-hmm. So then you went to Stanford and you recruited a data scientist in Ty. Ty, when you looked at the data, we often look at quantitative data. We look at numbers and graphs, but really until you, just like we just heard, the qualitative data from digging deeper, looking at all the available evidence and interviewing people and finding out, each shooting really is its own individual standalone incident, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's ultimately two parts of this. I'll give a bit of background about how I kind of got involved in the first place. So this was part of my time in kind of like product ops. So Axon has this great kind of rotational program that lets you explore and be part of different department. I came about it on a data perspective, but when I was on the TASER pillar there, Pat Madden, who's the SVP or the general manager of that TASER, was reaching out during that T10 deploy, T10 product development, and we were expanding a lot of resources there. Right, he wanted to see that there was sort of this bigger goal to it. Right, like it was. I mean, they were always going to do it, but it was more like, hey, what can you tell us about the world, about where this weapon's going to be positioned ultimately, right? So coming in, we were looking at different sources, and the Washington Post is one of a few, but they're the one that really has a lot of back to 2015 information, and they've been pretty consistent at collecting that information. We used that as basically a guideline. It was me and another intern or person that was there. And what we would do is, you would go and cross collaborate. You would look at each one of these lines, and you're right, each one is its own unique unique incident, right? And there are special scenarios or special cases that comes with each one. And then from each one of these incidents, we're able to look in and figure out, based on media reporting, based on publicly available data, right, about like what are the specific circumstances. Now, of course, when you go to a large metropolitan with a more developed news media source, you're going to get more information, like potentially how many officers were going to be involved. You're going to get like stuff like, oh, what was the situations that were happening, versus if you go to maybe a more rural area, they might just record more generalized information, like this happened on this date. But sometimes you don't even get the date, right? It could be a range of dates. It's like the incident date is one date, but the civilian that was part of it might have died on another day, the following day or something like that. So there's a lot of nuances with it. And what we realized that in order to collect what we cared about, which was like for that first round, like durations and whether a T10 might have made a difference, right? It's hard to say, right? Because we also don't have like counterfactual to all this, right? Like we don't know the cases where a taser or maybe less lethal was deployed earlier on and successfully prevented the outcome of a fatal officer involved shooting. But even just looking at those incidents, we realized that there are a lot of there were key things that we need to look out for, which helped us look for them, was looking at body-worn camera footage, right? And being able to see whether an officer, for instance, had a taser equipped with them, or whether there were officer presence, or what type of distance was between the officer and the subject, right? At the time of the fatal involved shooting, for instance. So there's a lot of different factors. And then from those, we code them into a database, right? And then we started noticing trends, and we were raising my team was raising those indicators up that, hey, a lot of these events are happening at 40 feet or less, right? A lot of them have police officer backup, and there is some time that is involved, right? Some of them are extremely short, like split second, right? But timing was also a big factor to what we were looking on earlier on. And then later on, as Mike Wager said, right, then kind of like the moonshot started kind of coalescing together. And then you get, then we realized that we needed, a third party or an objective third party who was kind of the judge of these events as well, right? To be able to code in a lot of this information. But a lot of what I'm interested in is like the intermediary variables that are sometimes extremely hard to collect, right? And you have to go and just dive through different sources. Like there's that, the daily local source that you have for that portion. There's information that agencies will release. There's information that we know publicly available about the agencies that are available, or about the scenarios that you have to dive in. And you're right, in interviews is also a big part of that. So yeah, a lot of my role earlier on in this project was diving and trying to figure out, like getting that data, right? And it's a lot, like you hear data science and you're like, oh, you're just doing cool machine learning, or like you're trying to figure out like what is the right the factors, like controlling for the confounding factors versus the factors that we care about, or stuff like that. But earlier on, and where we are, I think it's exciting because we just look into collecting as much information as we can, and also like open for feedback, right? Open to get information, because we ultimately, right, we want to reduce deaths and officer involved shootings, and there's a lot of ways to do this, and there's a lot of people here, right, that is willing to support us on that.
We always talk about time, distance, and shielding, and we talk about de-escalation, but I could think about so many variables. And Mike already talked about the edged weapons as being a primary reason for the exchange. And but I could think of what type of service call was made, what's the officer thinking, what's the approach, what's the known weapon, what's not known, what are the distances before the shootings. I've talked to scientists, Eric Pisa in New York, from John Jay. We talked about looking at body-worn camera footage to see if there were any precursor facial expressions or body movements that might indicate that what the next move was going to be. Have you done anything like that?
Yeah, I think we'll get the database we released at ICP with the Institute for Intergovernmental Research. What we have is sort of tier 1 variables, so that's sort of reconstructing what's out there now and what's in current media reports, which is should be a number of caveats there. Like I would say, this is just the start.
Okay.
And this sort of paints a very broad picture. And if you look at the data currently, like there's a lot of missing variables, like a ton, like to the extent that sometimes you look at it, it's almost hard to draw some conclusions because there's so many missing variables. So like even around race, which you would think would be easy to come by, but certainly if we had more data, that may even change the narrative around race. But like that's just sort of one piece of that. Tier 2, as you bring up, there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more to go in depth, whether that's looking at body camera video, which we've done a lot of, and whether that's working with police departments and also collecting more in-depth data. I think that's another part of it. So we'll continue to do that work with our partners at the Institute for Intergovernmental Research. And say what we also hope, and by the way, I got my PhD with Eric. He is a great guy. He's a super smart researcher. He adds a lot to the field. He is right. There are other things that we can learn from body camera video. Obviously, we have a stake in that as a company that manufactures and sells body cameras. But I would say, like, we would also hope that sort of through this Moonshot effort and through sort of our database, this also spurs lots of other innovation out there. Like this spurs lots of other research out there. Like we don't have to be involved. And that's sort of the point of the larger Moonshot coalition that we put together. Now we think at Axon, we have a role to play. Now, obviously, through looking at the data and through what we do in terms of our less lethal devices, such as Taser 10, which is our newest device that is a direct result of this Moonshot goal, and thinking about the data behind it, we certainly think that we have a lot to offer in terms of training with our virtual reality training, which is tied to our Taser training as well. I mean, 17,000 officers go through our Taser training per year. If we could also put them through VR training that could add to helping us achieve this goal, like that's fabulous. That's incredible. And for example, like even looking at the data, and I like not just the database we have, but the others, we certainly see it daily. We know there's a mental health crisis going on across this country, and if you read reports on fatal officer involved shootings, or you look at the data, or you talk to departments, you talk to officers, obviously what's happening on the street right now, coming out of COVID, is just like, I don't know if it's been seen before. Now, obviously, police are the ones that are called to deal with situations where there's lots of breakdowns throughout society and other institutions, but that's the world we live in. If we provide police better training, perhaps through virtual reality, so that they can deal with folks in crisis in a different way, that also probably helps get us to that moonshot goal. But we would hope that there are partners out there as well. And we kicked off this coalition last year, so this is actually first year. We're not even into year two. Well, there's the National Fraternal Order of Police. They're one of our anchoring institutions. Whether it's the African American Mayors Association, another one of our anchoring institutions on this moonshot goal, to all the various associations, from the major county sheriffs of America to Cal Chiefs. Like, all of these partners are involved in this coalition now. Like, they have a lot to offer that doesn't have to be us. And it could be researchers like Eric Pisa, who maybe joins with departments and looks at that question, or it could be Cal Chiefs. Like, it could be, they could look at something with one of these questions and produce data, produce training, produce other things that will ultimately help us save lives.
Yeah,
Lexipol
I think
empowers
that's
first
awesome. I love
responders and
the
public
idea that
servants
you're
to
bringing
best
in,
meet the needs
the
of their
government
residents
people.
safely and
In
responsibly.
San Francisco, my old
serving more than
department,
2 million public
we were
safety and
never
government
authorized to
professionals
use
in over
the
8,000
tasers at
agencies
all.
and
And
municipalities.
it wasn't about the
Lexipol
data, and it
offers
wasn't
a
about the
range of
science or the
solutions that
research,
includes
but it was about
policies,
ideals
training,
and
behavioral health
the
resources,
idea
news and
that they
analysis,
would be
and grant
abused.
assistance
And
services
at the
for
same
law
time,
enforcement, fire and
we have
rescue, EMS,
people,
local government,
civilian
and other agencies
organizations and
dedicated
government
to public
agencies
safety.
saying, we
To
want you
learn
to
more, visit
de-escalate, but they don't want to give you the
lexipol.com.
tools
That's
to do it. So how do policies affect outcomes? What are you doing to demystify the process to people that are just seeing it as a weapon, as opposed to a less lethal or even non-lethal weapon that could save lives, both police and the offender or civilian suspect?
Yeah, for sure. And look, San Francisco is one of the final major cities out there that does not use taser devices. And our contention all along is, like, the goal is to save lives, and we need to give officers the technologies that they can use to de-escalate a situation and save lives. So if they don't have the appropriate, less lethal technologies, then you're really you're limiting their options. In terms of being abused, using it as some sort of device that can abuse citizens. I mean, that's how we got into the body camera business. Like, that's how Axon, or Taser at the time, that's how we started the body camera business. We knew that through officers using tasers, like, these concerns and questions were coming up. Well, let's put a camera on first the taser, and then obviously the officer, so we can show that officers are not misusing or abusing a taser device, and that they are saving lives. And that has, without a doubt, been the case across the board over the many, many years that we've had body cameras in the field. I mean, try to take a body camera away from an officer today and see what happens, because we know it shows that the officer is doing the right thing in 99% of the time. Like, it's not showing abusive officers, it's not showing officers who are doing bad things. Now, it does when things like that do happen, unfortunately do happen, say like in Memphis, it does surface those things, and then actions can be taken. But like we've shown, and we produce devices that are safe, and we've shown through sort of recording those incidents that officers are using them in the right way. And I'd say I'd take it a step further as we think through the moonshot goal. Like, in our latest device, which is Taser 10, Ty referred to as T10 earlier in the conversation. like it was constructed and thought about sort of with data in mind, as we talked about. Can we give that officer more chances to save a life? That's why now you have 10 shots. Why? Well, you're going to miss with the first two. I mean, situations are chaotic. You could miss with the first two. Situations are chaotic. So now we're able to fit 10 probes in one device. So it's almost treated like your semi-automatic handgun. But in terms of like community engagement and engagement with elected officials, when those questions come up, and they have, and we answer them, our departments answer them themselves, like, no, that is to save lives. Like that is to give that officer all the opportunities that they possibly can need to get a connection and save that life. And then we were able to talk about the distances involved as well. So we haven't seen the resistance across the board that we thought we would when we introduced the new taser weapon, because I think that in communities across the country, like they recognize like something has to change, and perhaps this is part of that change.
Yeah, I love the T10. I actually got to try it and fired it at ILETA in St. Louis over the summer, and the accuracy is amazing. I'm no, crack shot, and I could hit the target at 30 feet or more. So the effectiveness and the range is outstanding, and you can make that use happen before the suspect or the offender gets the chance to close the distance on you. Yeah. And then you have to resort to other weapons. I want to ask you about force options and availability and training, but first I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor. Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Mike Wagers and Tai Nguyen from Axon. We're talking about the database, the Moonshot, and the Taser 10, and the database that's going to help save lives of police officers and civilian offenders as well. Mike, did the type of force options or availability come into play when you looked at the data in these incidents?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I was thinking about the force continuum and thinking about where our latest device, which, by the way, we, to draw on the analogy of this being a moonshot goal, and to sort of harken back to the original moonshot goal, President Kennedy making that announcement at Rice University, like we call our Taser 10 device our Apollo, our Saturn V rocket. We think that's sort of like that first stage to get us there to the moon. And so we certainly thought about that sort of force continuum and where we were along that force continuum and how close we could get to the lethal part of the force continuum. And we can come back to that in a second. But I'd say, one thing, what we're seeing and what we had hoped is, again, this is a partnership across the board, not just a partnership with all these associations, with researchers, but a partnership with our customers, with agencies out there doing the work, with officers and deputies and troopers that are out there in the field that have to deploy our technology or deploy other technologies to try to save life. And we're getting back now body camera footage after body camera footage after body camera footage, and officers who have deployed Taser 10 with stories that we never would have thought would have been the case before. And that gets back to sort of thinking about how they would deploy force along that continuum. And for example, last one I looked at is a large major county sheriff's department. The officers got called to a scene, the 911 call, multiple 911 calls. There was a guy who was obviously in mental health crisis. He was going door to door, being aggressive and threatening violence. The reports from the caller said that he had a knife in his hand. The deputies roll up on the scene. You could hear this in the body camera video. They give out some commands. He's not listening, not complying. They have time and distance. They back up, and the deputies say, "Hey, let's try this new Taser 10." And so they're like, okay. And so one guy pulls out has his Taser 10. They got the cover officer, and they deploy the Taser 10. 3 probes. They make the connection with probe number 2 and probe number 3. Take the suspect down. They go get him in custody. Turns out he didn't have a knife. He had like a piece of cardboard with some duct tape on it. But the deputy says in that body camera video, like, could you imagine if we were within 6, 9, 12 feet and he had made a move toward us and we might not had another option? We would have had to we might have had to escalate to a lethal option. Like, they just saved a life there. And so we're seeing like case after case of those examples. And I think that's going to help us understand and maybe also help redefine the force continuum under certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good example. And certainly those situations of blue suicide where the individual's trying to prompt the officer into fatal action. How important is training? So did the report identify issues with training with or without an electronic device, about the availability, the quality, the thoroughness? What'd you find, Ty?
Yeah, so I'm excited to say that'll be part of the tier 2 release that we're having be part of it. So tier 1 from the database includes stuff like incident date, right? One of the things that you talked about was like, what type of, was it a call for service? What was the activity prompt? That was the event type initially. For instance, there's basic details on like officer and subject. Information there. For tier 2, that's when things get more in depth and we start looking more at, hey, what are the agency's training policy, or what are the individual officers trained on, for instance. So those are things that we're actively collecting right now, and this is one of those databases that's refreshed once, actually twice per year. So we should be getting good information in soon. We just want to make, and the reason why we're doing it twice is per year instead of more of a live cadence is, at least earlier on, is because we want to cross our T's and dot our I's, right? But some of the training features that at least the features or the variables that we're looking into, we're actively coding with IIR is coding as we speak. Yeah.
I'd say, Jim, one thing we've actually we've introduced new training without waiting for the data. We have our own data over the years, obviously from Taser deployments. But one thing we do know, like an officer, like they will go to the range and fire their handgun many times throughout the year and lots of rounds. Unfortunately, we know Taser cartridges are expensive. So you may fire your Taser once per year at that, and you may fire a couple cartridges. So one thing that we made a big push into, especially with our new Taser 10 device and related to this Moonshot goal, is new VR training that doesn't cost money to fire cartridges. You can put officers through VR training and let them fire hundreds of times to become more accurate at getting probes downrange and under different scenarios. And one thing that we've done that has really taken off is it started as sort of, I would say, a lark, but it wasn't like part of like the roadmap and thinking about this. And we created something called a Taser versus Zombies game, where younger officers like to play games. But what we found is like that is becoming a really effective mechanism to train officers on how to use Taser devices without having to go to an academy, without having to go to training to take them out of the field and have to deploy a lot of cartridges. And we've seen, and we've done experiments now looking at the data, where officers who've never picked up a Taser 10 device, the latest device, versus officers who have, if they go through Taser versus Zombies. And by the way, we did that we did that on purpose. So you couldn't say officers were firing at humans. Like they weren't just shooting hundreds of Taser rounds at humans. They were zombies. No one can fault us for like shooting at zombies. we found that those who went through the taser versus zombies training first, which is 3 to 5 minute game, they are 2.2 seconds quicker to get probes downrange to neutralize a suspect. Like, that's important findings for us internal and data for us internally to continue to refine the training that we push back out to officers who will be using taser devices in the field.
Wow, I didn't realize a taser would work on a zombie. It's good to know.
It also works on, we didn't know either, but these these zombie dogs come at you as well. Those are the hardest to hit. So,
so what's the feedback, Ben? Are the agencies talking about the database? Have you released it?
We released it to ICP, our partner organizations and associations. For example, the National Policing Institute, another one of our partners. They were involved in the release. The National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, they were another partner organization involved in the release. And I'd say all sort of qualitative, data coming back, sort of anecdotal, what we heard at IECP and what we've heard coming out of IECP is great. Like, we started the podcast, like, if we have the data, if we can predict it, we can prevent it. And I think that what the feedback we're hearing is, like, we just can't depend on the current databases out there today to do that. And again, they don't go in depth as one would need. So the feedback so far has been extremely positive, saying, way to go, keep it up. And I think what our partners and agencies across the country, one reason we took on this is that, we're in this for the long haul. Like, certainly we hope we can hit that Moonshot goal well within 10 years. That's a lot of lives that we believe there's a lot of lives that we can save, or obviously given the right technology and training, et cetera, to agencies out there, we can hit it within 10 years. But they know that, we will be around. And now we sort of serve as this neutral convener, if you will, around this Moonshot goal, that we'll be able to keep this database going over the duration of this project and even further.
Mm-hmm. And Ty, you talked about the second tier of research. What do you expect to find? What new source of information are you going to do? Like public records requests for the incident reports to get more dimension? What's the next step?
Yeah, so that's down to our partners at IIR to understand. So from my perspective, right, the best way is to get as raw of information as we can. But ultimately, it's down to IIR and their research methodology there. And of course, we'll be collaborating on some of this, but a lot of the push now is with IIR. Oh, yeah.
All right. And the data, it's part of the Moonshot goal. You want to turn around and give it out to law enforcement agencies, make better recommendations on closing distances, improving training, trying out different devices, looking for sort of precursor movements, things like that. What are the next steps overall from Axon?
Yeah, sure. We'll be entering year 2 in 2024. We'll continue to build the partnership or the coalition, sort of the coalition of the willing. And we do hope now with this new database, even with tier 1 data, and then as we get into tier 2 data, and then, there's lots of good stuff happening across the country. Agencies collecting great data, doing great analysis through other researchers. We hope to continue to surface that data so that, we'll continue to push as a company with our technology and with our training. But we hope with this coalition, like, this spurs innovation. Like this spurs innovation, whether it's around other less lethal technology. Like, we want that to happen. Like, we don't, it's not all about Axon and tasers. Now, we think that we play a large role in that. And as you said, like, or as I said earlier, like, we see Taser 10 as our Saturn V rocket to get us there. But look, if there are other companies out there that have great ideas that can save a life, or if there are associations out there or others who have great training, new training, innovative training, like, or there are groups out there that come forward and think new policies need to be sort of implemented. It's not the role that we'll play. We'll play and continue to convene this Moonshot coalition, if you will. But we hope there's lots of innovation. We hope there's a lot of new thinking around this idea that will continue to push it forward. And I think that's what you'll see in year 2. And I think you'll start seeing some of our partners come out with some really cool and innovative ways that they think, based on data, hopefully from this database or elsewhere, that can reduce gun deaths between the police and public.
Absolutely. And I want to tell our listeners that you can find the link to the Institute for Intergovernmental Research and the report on the website. Mike Wager, Senior Vice President, Strategic Initiatives at Axon. Thank you for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
And Tai Nguyen, Senior Data Scientist, looking at the IIR, making some conclusions and recommendations, and you're going to jump on that second tier of information and give another dimension to the next report. Is that right?
Sure. Yep. Happy and looking forward to it. Thanks, Jim, for having us.
You bet. All right. Hey, to our listeners, check out the link below. Let me know what you think. And be sure and drop us a line. And if you have questions about the report or how to reach Mike or Ty, drop me an email at policingmatters@policeone.com. That's policingmatters@policeone.com. Stay safe. Thanks for listening. Hope to chat again with you real soon. Take good care.